With those four simple words, spoken in a calm, monotone voice over a police dispatcher's line, a new kind of monster was born in the American consciousness. This was not just a murderer. He was a performer, a brand manager for his own atrocities. He gave himself a name. He gave himself a symbol, a simple crosshairs icon that would become synonymous with terror. And he communicated, not through whispers in the criminal underworld, but through bold headlines on the front pages of California's biggest newspapers. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, an unknown killer held the San Francisco Bay Area in a grip of fear, not just with the brutality of his crimes but with his masterful manipulation of the media and the public. He was more than a serial killer. He was a domestic terrorist who turned murder into a public spectacle. He didn't just flee the scene of his crimes, he reported them himself, calling the police from a payphone to take credit and to lay down his challenge. He wrote dozens of letters to the San Francisco Chronicle, the Vallejo Times-Herald, and the San Francisco Examiner, letters filled with taunts, threats, and bizarre, rambling confessions. He claimed responsibility for his killings, providing details that only the murderer could know, ensuring his name, the Zodiac, would be printed for all to see. He made the entire Bay Area his unwilling audience, transforming a series of random, brutal attacks into a running, terrifying narrative where he was the star. But the Zodiac's most unique and enduring legacy, the trait that separates him from all other killers, was his use of cryptography. He didn't just write letters, he sent puzzles. He created complex, coded messages using a bizarre alphabet of his own invention and dared the world to solve them. He was turning the hunt for his identity into a national parlor game, a twisted challenge for law enforcement and the public alike. And within these ciphers, he made the ultimate promise that his name, the most sought-after secret in America, was locked away behind this veil of strange symbols. He was, in effect, handing the world the key to his own capture and daring anyone to be smart enough to use it. The fear he generated was palpable. The randomness of his attacks, targeting young couples in parked cars, picnickers by a lake, a lone taxi driver in the city, created a sense that anyone, anywhere, could be his next victim. He threatened to shoot up a school bus full of children, a threat that, whether real or a bluff, caused widespread panic and led to armed police escorts for school buses. He was a faceless boogeyman who could be your neighbor, the man standing next to you at the grocery store, the driver of the cab you just hailed. He was everywhere and nowhere. This brings us to the core questions of this case, mysteries that have haunted investigators for over 50 years. Who was the man behind the mask and the symbol? Was he a brilliant criminal mastermind, a genius codebreaker who successfully outwitted the entire American law enforcement system? Or was he just a lucky, sadistic amateur who got away with it all? And what is the true meaning of the ciphers he left behind? Are they a genuine, solvable puzzle containing his name, or just the meaningless, cruel games of a madman, designed to send police on a wild goose chase forever? In this case file, we are opening the archives on America's most infamous cryptographic mystery. We will trace the Zodiac's campaign of terror and dive deep into the ciphers he left behind, the ones we've solved, the ones we've only just cracked, and the ones that still hold their secrets. Before the letters, the ciphers, and the name that would terrorize a state, there was just a cold, dark night and an unsolved crime. The Zodiac's reign of terror began on December 20th, 1968, on a remote, dark stretch of road known as Lake Herman Road in Benicia, California. High school students Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday were on their first date, parked in a gravel turnout, a spot known as a local lover's lane. Sometime after 11 p.m., another car pulled up beside them. The students were shot and killed in a swift, brutal attack. For months, the case went cold. There was no known motive, no suspect, just the tragic, inexplicable murder of two teenagers. The public was horrified, but they had no idea this was just the first move in a much larger, more terrifying game. Over 6 months later, on the 4th of July, 1969, the killer struck again. In a park in the nearby city of Vallejo, another young couple, Darlene Farron and Michael Mageau, were sitting in their car when a man approached them. He shined a bright flashlight into their eyes to blind them, then opened fire with a 9mm pistol, the same type of weapon used in the first murders. Darlene Ferrin was killed. Michael Mageau was shot multiple times in the face, neck, and chest, but he would miraculously survive. The attack was shocking, but what happened less than an hour later is what truly began the legend. At 12:40 a.m., a man called the Vallejo Police Department. His voice was calm, almost rehearsed. "I wish to report a murder," he said. "No, a double murder. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year." He was directly linking the two crimes, taking credit for the unsolved Lake Herman Road killings. He was no longer an unknown assailant, he was a killer who wanted his work to be recognized. The Zodiac had just introduced himself. His confidence, and his taste for theatricality, escalated dramatically with his next attack on September 27, 1969. This time, he didn't strike under the cover of darkness. In broad daylight, at the scenic Lake Berryessa in Napa County, he approached two college students, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, as they were picnicking by the water. The man who approached them was wearing one of the most terrifying costumes in the history of true crime, a dark medieval-style executioner's hood with clip-on sunglasses over the eye holes and a bib over his chest emblazoned with the crosshair symbol. He held them at gunpoint, claimed to be an escaped convict, and tied them both up. Then, he put the gun away, pulled out a long knife, and brutally stabbed both of them repeatedly before calmly walking away. He then went to Brian Hartnell's car and drew the crosshair symbol on the door, writing the dates of his previous attacks underneath it. As with his last crime, he then drove to a payphone and called the police, reporting his own double murder. Cecilia Shepard died from her injuries 2 days later. Incredibly, Brian Hartnell survived to tell the police about the hooded man who had attacked them. Just 2 weeks later, on October 11, 1969, the Zodiac brought his campaign of terror directly into the heart of a major city. He hailed a taxi in San Francisco, driven by a man named Paul Stine. He asked to be taken to the upscale neighborhood of Presidio Heights. There, he shot Stine in the head, killing him instantly. In a chilling new signature, the killer then used a knife to cut away a large piece of Stine's bloody shirt, a trophy from his kill. The murder was witnessed by teenagers across the street, who called the police. In one of the most frustrating near misses in criminal history, responding officers saw a white man walking away from the scene. But because the police dispatcher had mistakenly reported the suspect as being black, they drove right past him after a brief exchange. The Zodiac would later mock them for this incompetence in a letter, sending a piece of Paul Stine's bloody shirt to the San Francisco Chronicle as proof that he was the killer they had let slip through their fingers. In less than a year, he had claimed 5 lives, established his persona, and proven he could strike anywhere, anytime. The stage was now set for his ultimate challenge to the world. On August 1, 1969, less than a month after the Blue Rock Springs attack, the Zodiac Killer escalated his game from terror to intellectual warfare. 3 envelopes, nearly identical, arrived at the offices of the Vallejo Times-Herald, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the San Francisco Examiner. Inside each was a letter that began with the now infamous line, "This is the murderer." The letters provided details about the recent murders that only the killer could have known, proving their authenticity beyond any doubt. But they also contained something else, something that would elevate the case into a national obsession. Each letter contained 1/3 of a large, complex cipher, a grid of 408 strange symbols, and a demand. The killer's instructions were clear and menacing. He demanded that all 3 newspapers publish his 3-part cipher on their front page by the following afternoon. If they failed to comply, he promised he would go on a kill rampage that weekend, and that his next victims would be a dozen people. The newspapers were now faced with an incredible ethical dilemma, forced to choose between giving a murderer the public platform he craved or potentially having the blood of more victims on their hands. They chose to publish. The Zodiac's puzzle was now presented to the world, turning the entire Bay Area and beyond into a community of potential code breakers, all working against a killer's deadly clock. While the FBI and military intelligence cryptographers began their own analysis, the solution came from a far more unassuming source. In Salinas, California, a high school history teacher named Donald Hardin and his wife, Betty, saw the cipher printed in the paper and decided to take on the challenge. Working at their kitchen table over a single weekend, armed with little more than paper, pencils, and encyclopedias on cryptography, they began to attack the code. They correctly assumed it was a substitution cipher, where each symbol stands for a letter. They started with the basics of frequency analysis, assuming the most repeated symbols likely stood for the most common letters in the English language, like E, T, and A. They looked for double symbols, guessing they might represent common double letters like LL or SS. Their key breakthrough came from a simple psychological guess, that a killer this egotistical would most likely start his message with the word I. Working for more than 20 hours straight, they painstakingly substituted letters for symbols, tested combinations, and slowly, word by word, the killer's bizarre and terrifying message began to emerge from the jumble of symbols. The cipher was a homophonic substitution cipher, a step above a simple code where the Zodiac used multiple different symbols to represent the same common letters in an attempt to thwart the exact kind of frequency analysis the Hardins were using. But it wasn't sophisticated enough to stop them. On August 8th, they sent their solution to the authorities. The world now had its first direct look into the mind of the Zodiac Killer. The message, complete with spelling errors, was more chilling than anyone could have imagined. It read, "I like killing people because it is so much fun. It's more fun than killing wild game in the forest. Because man is the most dangerous animal of all to kill, something gives me the most thrilling experience. It is even better than getting your rocks off with a girl. The best part of it is, when I die, I will be reborn in paradise, and I have killed will become my slaves. I will not give you my name because you will try to sloi down or atop my collection of slaves for my afterlife." The final 18 letters of the cipher remain an unsolved, meaningless jumble to this day. The puzzle was solved, but it offered no real answers. It was not a confession from a tormented soul or a cry for help. It was a manifesto. It revealed the killer's motive was a thrilling experience, and it exposed his twisted personal mythology of an afterlife where his victims would serve him as slaves. Most frustratingly of all, he explicitly stated his refusal to provide his name. The first cipher had been cracked, but instead of bringing the case closer to a resolution, it only deepened the horror and solidified the legend of the Zodiac. The quick solving of his first cipher seems to have wounded the Zodiac's ego. He had presented himself as a master of puzzles, yet a high school teacher had unmasked his message in less than a day. In his subsequent communications, he appeared determined to up the ante, to create a cryptographic challenge so complex that it would cement his reputation as a genius and leave the world's best codebreakers stumped. With his next series of letters, he would succeed beyond his wildest dreams, creating a set of unsolved puzzles that would haunt investigators for the next 50 years. On November 8, 1969, just under a month after murdering taxi driver Paul Stine in San Francisco, the Zodiac mailed a new letter to the San Francisco Chronicle. It contained a greeting card, a new taunting message, and his new masterpiece, a dense, chaotic block of 340 symbols. This cipher, which became known as the Z-340, was clearly a different beast from its predecessor. It was shorter, but far more complex in its structure and symbol distribution. It seemed to lack any of the obvious patterns that the Hardins had exploited to crack the first code. The Z-340 quickly became the holy grail of the Zodiac case. The most brilliant cryptographic minds in the country were set loose on it. Teams at the FBI and the National Security Agency, the NSA, worked on the puzzle for years, applying sophisticated techniques and, eventually, computer analysis. They failed. Famed cryptographers, university mathematicians, and dedicated amateur sleuths from around the world all tried their hand, and they all failed. For 5 decades, the Z-340 stood as a silent, unbreachable monument to its creator's cunning. It was the ultimate proof of the Zodiac's mystique, a 340-character testament to an intellect that seemed, for all intents and purposes, to be unbreakable. As the Z340 continued to baffle experts, the Zodiac sent yet another, even more tantalizing puzzle. In a letter mailed on April 20, 1970, after bragging about his crimes and mocking the police, he made the promise everyone had been waiting for. He wrote, "This is the Zodiac speaking. By the way, have you cracked the last cipher I sent you? My name is," followed by a short line of just 13 symbols. This was it. The key to the entire case, explicitly promised by the killer himself. But the Z13 cipher, as it came to be known, was an act of pure cryptographic cruelty. Its very brevity is what makes it so secure. A long cipher, like the Z408, contains enough data to perform frequency analysis and identify patterns. A short, 13-character cipher does not. There simply isn't enough information to definitively test for letter frequencies or patterns. Over the years, codebreakers have demonstrated that dozens, if not hundreds, of different names and phrases can be plausibly reverse-engineered to fit the 13 symbols. But with no way to confirm a correct solution, it remains an exercise in pure speculation. The Zodiac had dangled the ultimate prize in front of the world, only to lock it in a box that was mathematically impossible to open. A few months later, in June of 1970, he sent his final major puzzle. This letter included a map of the San Francisco Bay Area, with the Zodiac crosshairs placed over Mount Diablo. The Zodiac claimed this location was to be used as a 0 point for finding a bomb he had planted. The instructions, he said, were hidden in an accompanying 32-character cipher. The letter threatened that the bomb would go off in the fall and would wipe out a school bus. The bomb, of course, was never found and is universally believed to have been another one of the Zodiac's elaborate and terrifying hoaxes, a game designed to spread fear and waste police resources. And with that, the Zodiac's main cryptographic campaign came to an end. He left the world with 3 great, unsolved puzzles. A massive, complex cipher that had stumped the greatest minds for a generation, a short, agonizing promise of his name that was too brief to solve, and a cryptic map to a non-existent bomb. For 50 years, these ciphers would remain silent, their secrets locked away, defining the Zodiac case as America's most chilling and intellectually frustrating cold case. For 51 years, the Z340 cipher remained a cryptographic ghost, a testament to the Zodiac's cunning. The world's most powerful intelligence agencies had failed to break it. An army of amateur sleuths had dedicated their lives to it, to no avail. The case grew colder, the trail fainter, and it seemed that the secrets of the 340 cipher would remain locked away forever. And then, in December of 2020, the silence was shattered. News broke around the world that the unbreakable code had finally been broken. The team that succeeded where so many had failed was not a government agency, but a small, international trio of private citizens, connected by the internet and a shared obsession with the Zodiac case. The team was led by David Oranchak, an American web designer who had been working on the Zodiac ciphers for over 14 years. He was joined by Sam Blake, a mathematician based in Australia, and Jarl van Eyck, a Belgian computer programmer. For years, they had been running sophisticated code-breaking software, testing hundreds of thousands of potential solutions, all of them leading to dead ends and gibberish. But they were about to stumble upon the key that had eluded everyone for half a century. They knew the cipher was likely a homophonic substitution, similar to the first one. The problem was that even after correctly substituting symbols for letters, the message was still a meaningless jumble. This meant the Zodiac had done something else. He had manipulated the transposition, the order in which the letters were meant to be read. For years, everyone had assumed the message was to be read horizontally, like a book. The breakthrough came when the team began to seriously test for non-traditional reading patterns, specifically diagonal movements. Using Van Eyck's custom-built software, they began analyzing the grid of symbols in a new way. They discovered a bizarre, complex pattern. The killer had written his message diagonally, stepping down 1 row and 2 columns over for each new letter. Once this diagonal pattern was discovered and applied, their software began to spit out something that, for the first time, was not gibberish. Coherent words and phrases began to emerge from the 51-year-old puzzle. They had found the key. After decades of silence, the Zodiac was about to speak again. The full decoded message was submitted to the FBI, which confirmed their solution was valid. And the world finally learned what the Zodiac had written on that November day in 1969. The message read, complete with his typical spelling errors, "I hope you are having lots of fun and trying to catch me. That wasn't me on the TV show," which brings up a point about me. "I am not afraid of the gas chamber, because it will send me to paradise all the sooner, because I now have enough slaves to work for me where everyone else has nothing. When they reach paradise, so they are afraid of death. I am not afraid because I know that my new life will be an easy one in paradise death." The message was both a revelation and a profound disappointment. It was a direct communication, referencing a famous incident in October 1969 when someone claiming to be the Zodiac had called into a live television talk show. The real Zodiac was using the cipher to deny it was him. It also saw him doubling down on his bizarre slaves in paradise afterlife motive. But the one thing everyone hoped for, a name, a location, any clue that could identify the killer, was not there. It was just more taunting, more egotistical rambling, another dead end. The cracking of the Z340 was a monumental achievement, a victory for citizen solvers and a testament to modern collaborative power. It proved the Zodiac was not some infallible genius whose codes were magic. But it also proved that even when he was understood, he gave away nothing. The 50-year silence was broken, only to be replaced by the same frustrating mystery. With the cracking of the Z340 cipher, the world had another message from the Zodiac, but it was no closer to having a name. The puzzles, which once seemed to hold the key to the killer's identity, had so far only revealed his psychology. This forced investigators, both professional and amateur, back to the traditional, frustrating work of police work, a hunt for suspects. The new goal was to work in reverse, to find a man who fit the profile of the killer and then see if he could be connected to the ciphers. Over the past 5 decades, dozens of names have been put forward, but one suspect has dominated the conversation more than any other. His name was Arthur Lee Allen, a former elementary school teacher who was fired for inappropriate conduct with students. The circumstantial evidence against Allen was, for a time, overwhelming. He lived in Vallejo and was in the vicinity of several of the crimes when they occurred. He owned and wore a Zodiac brand watch, complete with the crosshair symbol on its face. He was reportedly ambidextrous. He wore a size 8.5 shoe, matching a boot print found at the Lake Berryessa crime scene. In an interview with police, he claimed his favorite book was The Most Dangerous Game, a story about a man who hunts humans for sport, the same theme the Zodiac referenced in his first decoded cipher. Even more damning, a former friend told police that Allen had confessed his desire to hunt people with a gun and a flashlight attached to it, and that he had used the name Zodiac years before the killings began. For decades, Allen was the prime suspect, the man most people believed was the Zodiac Killer. But the hard, physical evidence never lined up. Multiple handwriting experts compared Allen's writing to the Zodiac's and concluded it was not a match. Fingerprints and a partial palm print found at crime scenes and on the letters did not match Allen's. The most significant blow to the case against him came after his death in 1992. Investigators were able to obtain a DNA sample from saliva left on the stamps and envelopes of the Zodiac's letters. When compared to a sample of Allen's DNA, it was not a match. While this doesn't offer a 100% exoneration, he could have had someone else lick the envelopes. It remains a powerful piece of evidence pointing away from the man who was, for so long, the face of the investigation. With the case against Allen significantly weakened, the 21st century has seen a rise in new theories and new suspects, often championed by dedicated groups of private citizens and retired law enforcement officials. In 2021, a group called the Casebreakers, comprised of more than 40 former investigators, claimed to have definitively identified the Zodiac as a man named Gary Francis Post, who had passed away in 2018. They presented circumstantial evidence from acquaintances and alleged photographic proof of scars on Post's forehead that matched a police sketch of the killer. Critically, these modern investigations often try to prove their case by solving the remaining, short ciphers to reveal their suspect's name. The Case Breakers group, for instance, claimed that Post's full name could be found by applying a complex enigmatic key to the unsolved ciphers. This approach, however, is highly controversial in the cryptographic community. It is notoriously easy to find patterns in names in random assortments of letters if you are already looking for them, and these kinds of solutions are impossible to verify independently. To date, law enforcement agencies, including the FBI, have not validated the claims against Post or any other new suspect, and the case officially remains open and unsolved. The disconnect between the compelling circumstantial cases against men like Allen and Post, and the frustrating lack of a match with the physical and confirmed cryptographic evidence, remains the central problem of the entire investigation. More than 50 years have passed since the Zodiac Killer sent his last confirmed letter. His campaign of terror, which held Northern California in its grip, eventually faded into an unnerving silence. The phone calls stopped. The taunting letters ceased. The ciphers, his cryptic calling cards, were all that remained. Today, the Zodiac case is a ghost that haunts the halls of American law enforcement, a cold case that has become a legend, defined by the very puzzles the killer left for us to solve. The legacy of the ciphers is one of profound frustration. The first, the C-003, was cracked quickly, offering a terrifying window into the killer's motivations, the thrill of the hunt, and a twisted belief in an afterlife where his victims would be his slaves. The second, the C-003, held its secrets for half a century, a testament to the killer's cunning, only to reveal more of the same. More egotistical rambling, more taunts, but no name. It was a cryptographic triumph that was an investigative dead end. And the final two, the Z-32 map cipher and the Z-13 my name is cipher, remain unsolved to this day. The killer's most explicit promise, to give us his name, is locked away in a puzzle so brief that it may be mathematically impossible to ever solve with certainty. The keys he gave us do not seem to fit the locks we need to open. Perhaps the true genius of the Zodiac was never in his cryptography. While his codes were clever, they were not flawless. His real, twisted genius was in public relations. He was a pioneer of a new kind of terror. He understood, long before the age of social media, how to control a narrative, how to create a brand, and how to go viral. By giving himself a name, a logo, and a public puzzle to solve, he transformed himself from a common, brutal murderer into a pop culture supervillain. He made himself the star of his own real-life horror story, and he made the public, the police, and the press the supporting cast. He didn't just commit crimes, he created a mythology, and it is that mythology that has given him a dark form of immortality. So, after all the years, all the suspects, and all the broken codes, where does that leave us? The file on the Zodiac Killer remains stubbornly, frustratingly open. Despite decades of work by dedicated investigators and the brilliant recent success of citizen solvers, we are no closer to knowing his name with any certainty. He was never caught. His identity has never been confirmed. The man who terrorized a community and taunted a nation simply vanished, fading back into the society he had preyed upon. It is the chilling, inescapable conclusion that the Zodiac got away with it. He is almost certainly long dead, having lived out the remainder of his life in anonymity. The final victory, the last laugh, belongs to him. The ciphers, which he promised would be his undoing, ultimately became the foundation of his dark legend. They were not a key to his identity, but a monument to his ego, a puzzle designed not to be solved, but to be puzzled over, forever. His greatest secret is the one he never actually put into a code, the one he took to his grave. If you want to explore more of history's most compelling cold cases, subscribe to the Archivist and click the bell so you never miss a file.